So welcome everybody who's joining us for Words and Stories. So just for those of you also who are joining us, just to remind you that, yes, this is the Festival of Social Justice across the whole of Amnesty Central England. There's over 40 local groups running events over a period of 6 weeks. So still a couple of weeks to go. So do check out the programme on Amnesty International Central England. And you'll find there are still some events running. I'm sure you'll be able to still sign up to. So I'd like you to sit back and hopefully have a drink and enjoy Words and Stories. And in this section, we've got powerful poetry, uplifting music, storytelling, an exciting project about Shakespeare from the library in Birmingham. Particular relevance, we've got Richard Burden in conversation about Palestine, and Steve McCabe, MP, speaking very clearly about injustice. So I'm going to be introducing the first act, and this is Casey Bailey, who describes himself as educator, writer and performer. He's also the Birmingham Poet Laureate. He's been a great support to us in this festival, and he wrote some poems especially for the Sutton Coldfield event, Voices for Change. And we thought they were so good, we really wanted to share that again. So before just bringing in Casey Bailey, I'd like to just read Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 9. Nobody shall be arrested, detained, or exiled from their country without good reason. So thank you. Just passing over to the powerful poetry of Casey Bailey.
Hi guys, my name is Casey Bailey and this short poetry set is for the Sutton Coldfield Amnesty International Group. This first poem is called Frameless and it is written for the detainees and former detainees of Guantanamo Bay. Caged men cheered as my feet drummed the corridors. They think that I left that day. Think when their bodies travel home, heart beating in their chest, they will be free. I know different. There is a newspaper article in a frame at home. It is 6 years old. Speaks of my release. My freedom. Here in this room with no frames on the walls, I kneel in prayer, knowing that I can't be free. In this hollow ribcage of a room, I roar like my stomach during my last hunger strike, and like then, nobody can hear. No one listens to the emptiness trapped in these bones. My son was 15 the first time I met him. He saw a stranger, not a father, a victim, not a leader. He saw emptiness at the back of my eyes where parents hold love. Maybe this is why I travel here. When the pillow holds my head at midnight or noon, when traffic makes me pause without distraction, when his mother holds me like she held on to hope. Nervous, enclosed spaces like the one that they put me in open spaces like the one that they snatched me from, scared to be happy. There are people whose bodies, heart beating, still pace those hollow ribcage rooms. If you torture a person for a day, you'll ruin their year. If you torture a person for a year, you will equip them with the tools to torture themselves forever. They will show no more mercy than you taught them. In my home, they sit around my flesh, talking of freedom. I stare at frameless walls, knowing I'll never have it. My second poem is called Mutual. I am 15 seconds into this YouTube video. The Syrian boy who looks no more than 15 says the same thing for the third time. Please do not think us to be savages. At least this is what the subtitles say. This time he elaborates beyond the statement. Please do not think us to be savages. We cry for our dead like you cry for yours. Parents hug children and children hug tighter. We do not wish this for you any more than we wish this for ourselves, I promise. Please do not think us to be savages. Do not think the people who hurt you are people who represent us. They are not. We do not smile for your pain. Some will, but not us. We take no joy in your death. Please do not think us to be savages. We have lost count of those we have lost, but we have not lost our faith in our God. Not lost the love that makes our hearts warm, not lost hope. Hope for us, hope for everyone. When the video stops, I allow myself to breathe. I allow myself to cry tears, tears of pain, tears of grief, tears of blood, tears of shame. I want to record him a video to respond. Tell him he could communicate with me without any need for subtitles or translations. Tell him that I understood his tortured plea before he took the time to share it with me. I want to record him a video in response, but I do not want to steal his words for him, and I feel the way he feels. Except I feel incapable of matching the eloquence of his emotion. I click on the comment symbol and I type. The feeling is mutual. My final poem is called Predisposition, and it goes like this. As a kid, I watched the Olympics. One gunshot started a race, 8 black men running. As a child, I asked my dad, why are they all black? Apparently, being born black is being born with a predisposition to be fast. I like the sound of this. As a man, I sit at home and watch the news. One gunshot fired by a police officer, 1 black man dead. The news shows a selection of others killed by the police. My nephew asks me, why are they all black? Apparently, being born black is being born with a predisposition to hold a lower value in society. Apparently, being born black is being born with a predisposition to be prejudicially treated by a judicial system which is preordained to be prejudiced against you. I don't like the sound of this. To be honest, when I weigh up the pros and cons, I would give back the speed and the bullets at the same time. Even the fastest man can't outrun a bullet. One gunshot can start a race. One gunshot can start a race riot. One gunshot can end a life. Cool. Thank you for having me, Sutton Coldfield Amnesty International Group. I hope the event goes really well. And thank you for having me involved. Peace and love.
So that was Casey Bailey, and I think every time I've heard that, it's hit home, really hit home. Now we're actually in our programme, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is not what we thought we'd be when we were discussing it over the last couple of days, going, what do we do? And I think after that, and we've had quite a lot of talk, it would be really helpful perhaps to have a little interval to have some music. So I'm just going to introduce some music again that was commissioned by Celebrating Sanctuary Birmingham for Refugee Week 2020. So we've had a few other artists from that today, and it's all been supported with funding from the Arts Council England. So our next artist is Ben Pathy. He's a singer and songwriter from Angola, and since moving to the UK, Ben has formed a band called Afro Mio. I think that was formed in 2008. They performed at venues across the Midlands and have also recorded. And this track, Condolo, sorry if I've mispronounced that, is a track from their new album. So over to Ben Pathy and Afro Mio. Thanks, Pete.
Yani lubumbu kondolo leke kadiva pamagile utalupo kikondolo mpangi kadiva pamagile bayaya ya munwe ya munwe ya munwe lupwanka dinune ya munwe lupwanka dinune mono kumbulo mamono ayaya misere mono misere mono pasiminina misere ayaya mayange mono mayangi mono pasiminina mayangi ayaya kichone mono kichona mono pasigina kichona amono mwana kondolo leke kaiva pamasina utalubumbu kondolo pangi kaiva pamasina baya ya munwe ya munwe lupwanka dinune ya munwe lupwanka dinune yalindo mbasikondo lomkundi kativapamasila mutalubumbu kondolo leke kativapamasile mapakile ya munwe ya munwe lupwanka dinune ya munwe lupwanka dinune embutebute makonzo
Oh yes, so that was Ben Pathy. So are we going into next, perhaps having one of our soapboxes? Is that possible, Pete?
Yes.
I haven't heard. So this was really about people recording themselves, talking about what social justice means to them, because this is obviously the theme of this festival is individuals having issues, concerns about social justice issues. So yes, over to a recording of Amnesty, mainly Amnesty members, but also friends of as well. Thanks, Pete.
For me, social justice means a right to equal opportunity and equal treatment for every member of society.
Social justice means for me, well, it's like another place at the moment. It's a place where we could live our lives without fear and intimidation, where governments work for people and for the planet, not just for power, where we can share our beliefs without denying others their beliefs, and where fairness is in charge and not fear. We can get there. I think we can get there, but we've got to work for it.
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of the destitute. Speak up for those who have no voice, and let them be judged fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy if we want to live a righteous life.
To me, social justice is about everybody on this earth being afforded the same privileges and freedoms, right down from the freedom to express your sexuality or the freedom to vote to the freedom to wear bare pyjamas if you want to wear bare pyjamas. Yeah, peace.
For me, social justice means using human rights to build better lives.
looking at the, watching the Ben Pathy music then, and also earlier listening to the young people in the Villa programme, and it crossed my mind. There's I've pressed something odd here, so I don't know what's happening now. One of the human rights that we might espouse or remind ourselves of is, if I can just get it, is human right number 27. And it's what we're lucky enough to be able to do today, which is get together and enjoy music and dance and poetry, hear each other's thoughts and views and experiences. And Article 27 says, everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancements and its benefit. Everyone has the right to protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary or artistic production of which he is the author. And to me, the sort of the reverse of that, if you like, is to do with how we today and beyond today continue to pursue and follow up social justice. And I was reminded of the poem, and I've just got the words out, of Martin Niemöller. You might remember this one, because it's about people who perhaps stand back from participating, and it's not to sort of put halos on our heads or to praise ourselves, but to encourage others to recognise the importance of getting involved in something like this, which has lots of fun in it. I mean, we've had laughs today. We'll certainly have laughs later on tonight, and enjoy culture, but also in doing so that we do something useful and worthwhile for other people. And this poem, First They Came, goes like this. It'll be familiar to people, but it's always worth revisiting it. Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.
If you woke up this morning with more health than illness, you are more blessed than the million who will not survive this week. If you've never experienced the danger of battle, the loneliness of imprisonment, the agony of torture, or the pangs of starvation, you are ahead of 500 million people in the world. If you can attend a meeting of like-minded people without fear of harassment, arrest, torture, or death, you are more blessed than 8 billion people in the world. If you have food in the fridge, clothes on your back, a roof over your head, and a place to sleep, you are richer than 75% of the world. If you have money in the bank, in your wallet, and spare change in a dish somewhere, you are among the top 8% of the world's wealthy. If you can read this message, you are more blessed than over 2 billion people in the world who cannot read at all. If you can see, hear, taste, smell, and feel, give thanks for these precious gifts by living your life to the full.
Oh, I can sing you a song if you like, John. It's Rob Harper.
Oh.
Hello, Rob. Yeah, come on then.
Okay.
Come on, then.
Those of you who haven't been here, I don't know if Pat's there, because you can't see all the faces on here, so I can't tell who's here and who isn't. But Pat introduced us to Rob this morning from Sun Coalfield, and from the where's the folk club you're all in there, and the pub you're singing in. Is that right? Am I getting you all mixed up? We had you and we had Stephen Booth. And tell us a bit about.
I'll get anywhere and everywhere.
The folk scene. Oh yeah.
Okay. This song came from America. I can't remember who wrote it now, but it's if I were free to speak my mind, I'd tell a tale to all mankind, how the flowers weary world has had its fill of ways of war on every hill. The time has come for peaceful ways and peaceful men of peaceful days. If I were free to speak my mind, I'd tell a tale to all mankind of this rich earth and all it means, of golden days and peaceful dreams, when all mankind has ceased to fight. I'll raise my head in thanks each night for this rich earth and all it means, for golden days and peaceful dreams. If I were free to speak my mind, I'd tell a tale to all mankind of this rich earth and all it means, for golden days and peaceful dreams.
Wow.
Okay, thank you all. Hope you enjoyed it.
What does social justice mean to me? Well, it's breaking the barriers. Being treated with respect and dignity, regardless of your culture, your ethnicity, or your gender. It should include equal access to opportunities and wages. We should strive to create an inclusive society for future generations.
Social justice for me means when the individual takes full responsibility for what they say and do. You can't really transform the world if you're not willing to transform yourself.
For me, social justice means people having a voice, people feeling valued and having the opportunity in society, whether that's a people group or an individual, for fairness to reign in society.
For me, social justice means stripping society of its unconscious bias and treating all people fairly.
Pete, we've no sound.
Protection of fundamental human rights, the right to live one's life with dignity and respect, the right to freedom of thought and expression, and very importantly, the right not to be discriminated against on grounds of race, class, gender, disability, age, sexuality, or belief. Social justice for me provides the foundation for the building of a humane, liberal, open, and democratic society. A willful, even callous disregard for social justice principles not only undermines such a society, it leads to its ultimate destruction.
and this is Ewan Fernie from the University of Birmingham, who's working with the Library of Birmingham, the Public Library of Birmingham. I think public's important in this story. Who's going to talk about something completely different, but about releasing, shall we say, the Library of Birmingham's world-famous, world-valued Shakespeare. It might not be world-famous, it's certainly world-valued Shakespeare collection to the people it was set up for, with the help of this guy, George Dawson. If you haven't heard of him before, you will now. We've got a little film first, Pete, I think, and then Ewan's going to speak, and then there's another film at the end. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, that's right, John. So, and I kicked my PowerPoint on after Pete showed the film. Is that correct?
That's right.
Fine, thank you.
Πότε μύρια λεπτά λαλούμενα σιγοκελαηδούν στα αυτιά μου. Πότε φωνές και σε ξύπνησα από τον πολύ ύπνο με κάνουν και αποκοιμιέμαι. Και πότε της υπνοφαντασίας μου τα νέφη φαίνοντέ μου σκίζονται.
Galoppate veloci cavalli dai piedi di fuoco alla dimora di Febo. Un cocchiere come Fetonte vi spingerebbe a colpi di frusta verso ovest e introdurrebbe subito l'ombrosa notte.
Dejen slikkok disen igenvis nis kan Afrikan.
Now is the winter of our discontent. Made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that loud upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried.
Nicht alles muss sagen und manches verschwiegen, nicht alles liege.
Na udar dain, na udar lain.
Dames et toi, je suis au-dessus de toi. Mais n'aie pas peur de la grandeur. Il y a ceux qui sont nés grands, certains qui atteignent la grandeur, et certains d'autres, la grandeur qui leur est imposée.
Πιο πλούσια κάτω από πυκνόφυλλη σκεπή ξαπλώνονται οι ερωτικοί διαλογισμοί.
Or bid me go into a new-made grave and hide me with a dead man in his shroud. And I'll do it without fear or doubt, to live an unstained wife to my sweet love.
가혹한 운명의 화살이 꽂힌 고통을 참고 죽으며 살아가든 그것이 옳은 것인지, 아니면 죽음으로써 거침없는 파도처럼 몰려드는 그것이 옳은 것인지, 죽는 것, 자는 것, 차이가 무엇인가?
Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle towards my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, yet I see thee still.
Pontida uia du isken zihonen, egis ocritis asuia uhonen. Il mila il ezia de hunen de honen de critis ohonen.
Muy pronto le he visto y tarde le conozco. Fatal nacimiento de amor habrá sido, si tengo que amar al peor enemigo.
I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows.
একটি বোকা জঙ্গলে ওর সঙ্গে দেখা করলাম, ওই যে একটি বোকা।
જો તમે મને ભમરો સમજો તો તમે મારા ઢાંકનો ખ્યાલ રાખજો.
Great. Well, my name's Ewan Fernie, and as John said, I lead a project which is called the Everything to Everybody project. And the film, what you've just seen, is a film of Birmingham citizens speaking Shakespeare in about half of the 94 languages that are represented in Birmingham Shakespeare Memorial Library. And I thought we'd start with that. Really, I hope to showcase that library. I mean, I honour, of course, the gravity and dignity of what we've just seen. And as John says, this is something completely different. But my hope would be that culture can itself model and express the sort of horizon de solidarité that the previous speaker was gesturing towards. Certainly, as I hope to tell you, this Birmingham Shakespeare Library, which, I mean, I'm a professor of Shakespeare studies and I didn't know about, is an extraordinary thing, as John's indicated, and it was a social justice project from the first, and the project I lead with the library is about, we hope, making it a social justice project again, and I'll explain a bit more about that as we go. So I'm going to try to share my PowerPoint with you here. I hope you can all see that. Now I've just got to work out how to play it, which is that. So the project, as you see, is called Everything to Everybody, and there's a website address there if you're interested. And it's not moving on, but yeah. So we've seen that film. Many of you will know that view. It's the Shakespeare Memorial Room, which sits on the top of the Library of Birmingham in a golden cap. And many people think when they see it that and understandably so, that is the Birmingham's Shakespeare Library. And indeed it was when it was first opened in 1882, but they very quickly had to create a basement, and the Shakespeare collection actually extends to 100,000 objects. It is the first great Shakespeare library in the world. It's still in the sort of top 3, and it remains the largest Shakespeare library. John said public's an important word, world in public ownership anywhere in the world. It was founded in 1864, and that really isn't well enough known, I think. This is Birmingham's copy of the first folio, which, again, many of you, if not all of you, will be familiar. Oops, for some reason it's moved forward. Will be familiar with, and you see that stamp there. I mean, I have colleagues who would regard that as a defacement. I don't know why it's doing that, but a defacement of this great book. But in fact, what they said in Birmingham when they stamped it, as property of all the people of the city, was that culture, nothing is too good for ordinary people, and it should belong to everybody. Perhaps the PowerPoint is hurrying me along because I know we're a bit behind time here on the schedule. So that's George Dawson, who something's right. I don't know. I'll try and do this again. Maybe. Perhaps I'll do it through. Since it's moving it on, and since you've got lots of time, I'm going to show you this rather inelegantly, so we don't just skip through the slides. But this is George Dawson, who John mentioned. George Dawson came to Birmingham in 1844. And he was, I suppose, a sort of pioneering social figure, social justice warrior in his own right. His first biographer, Wright Wilson, called him a fighting man of the people. While I listened to your last speaker, I was minded that George Dawson was a great advocate for European freedom, and he established a fund in England for freedom wherever it was needed. So perhaps to that extent was a sort of precursor of amnesty and the great work you do. He was the proponent of something called the civic gospel, and the 19th century historian Asa Briggs sees really the idea of the modern city starting in Birmingham and sort of first expressed by George Dawson, and the speech which is usually seen as kicking off the civic gospel, which was the idea that a town should be something more than just a collection of people looking for work, that it should be a place where social justice and social welfare was cultivated. And Dawson really hit upon this when he spoke at the opening of the Central Library, as it happens. And he said that a town like this, Birmingham wasn't a city at that point, shouldn't be just a nest of vipers in a pot, his phrase, but rather should be a conduit of moral and spiritual energies. And he thought that's what the library was. The library movement was deeply important to him. It was just sort of getting going at that time, as many of you know, and he said a library was the largest and the widest church ever established. So he saw a sacred importance in books and in giving them away to all of the people. And he was one of the main advocates of Birmingham's Shakespeare Library. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. That library was established in 1864. As I say, it's one of the great Shakespeare collections in the world. You might be wondering, you know, what the popular value of a Shakespeare collection is, and I think it's a good question, actually. This collection is held in trust for the people of Birmingham, but why should the people of Birmingham be interested in this collection? And I think it's important to say here that it's an enormously wide-ranging collection. It's not just a load of dusty old books. And as you see here, there are artworks by Dali, Picasso, Cocteau, Kokoschka, and that's just the beginning. There are also scrapbooks, photographs, annotated scripts, adaptations, newspaper cuttings. Just to give you one stat, there are 17,000 production photos of productions of Shakespeare from all around the globe. So it's a global collection in Birmingham that belongs to the diverse people of Birmingham. I'm going to show you this particular one of my favorites. I mean, to my amazement, these are 19th century copies of Shakespeare and of Shakespeare criticism for the blind and partially sighted. And the sharp-eyed among you will be able to see that they're in Roman type, they're in raised dots, they're in arbitrary characters. So extraordinary emphasis on access, on cultural access and participation from the 19th century, and massively in advance of our own efforts today. So the Everything to Everybody project, as I say, which is something I think of the social justice project itself, aims to revive and reanimate Birmingham's historic Shakespeare collection according to the Everything to Everybody ethos of its founder, George Dawson, and absolutely crucially in conjunction and with the full participation of Birmingham communities now. So those are our strapline logos. I'm going to move quickly just in case there's any questions or there's time for questions. I know you've got to get to your next speakers. You'll recognise the bull in his ruff there, and we're very keen to bring this neglected, I should say, that it was almost entirely forgotten in 2016, which is, as again many of you will know, was the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, and there was a lot of Shakespearean hoo-ha around the world. 6 people used the Birmingham Shakespeare Memorial Library, one of the great collections and the only collection that belongs to all the people of the city. So what we're trying to do is really bring it to life with and for Birmingham's people. Now, one reason for its sort of languishing unused is what you're looking at now, which is the state of the catalogue. So there's no digital catalogue, so we are digitizing it. But we're also very eager to operate principles of participation and co-curation. And we have a range of activity strands. So one thing we're going to do, just to give you an example, is this first folio, which belongs to all the people of the city, only most of them don't know it. We're going to take out around the city. So we're working with various people. I know that Sutton Coldfield, Amnesty are here. We're working with Folio, for instance, to take the first folio to Sutton Coldfield, but we're also going to take it to the Bullring. We're going to take it into Winson Green Prison. We're going to hold a communal meal at Gap Arts, which is in Borsall Heath, for the diverse community that used it there, and have a conversation about establishment culture and what Shakespeare is and might be if were we to broaden participation across the communities of Birmingham in Birmingham Shakespearean culture. We've got a range of project themes which are meant to, we hope, appeal to people. One of them is Ophelia's Flowers, and the reason for that is that George Dawson actually preached on Ophelia's Flowers. He was a very unusual, heterodox preacher, and he preached on Ophelia's Flowers without any scriptural text. And he took the text where Ophelia says, here are pansies, I'd give you violets. I don't think it is pansies, but I'd give you violets, but they withered when my father died. And Dawson suddenly switched that from his own pulpit, which is actually a lecture, a lector, and he didn't see himself as a priest. He saw himself as somebody who was speaking to fellow students of truth. And he said to his congregation, if you like, that there are Ophelias all over 19th century Birmingham, and it's our duty to attend to them, to care for them, to make their place in society. So it's an amazing way. I mean, Ophelia dies, of course, in Shakespeare's tragedy, and in a sense, what Dawson was saying is let that not happen again. So we're going to cover the library with flowers made by children and various of our partners. I'm going to move a bit quickly through this. So we designed the project by talking to people. We held a few consultation evenings at the library, and we asked people and organisations, people across the communities of Birmingham, and we have about 40-50 partner organisations who know their own audiences and membership to help us to bring people in. And we've got some amazing projects, and please do look out for them. I can say that because they really are federated, and they're run by other people, the people we're working with. Just to give you one example, we're working with an organisation called Desi Blitz, which is based in Birmingham, and some of you may know, which is largely web-based, but it's one of the biggest British Asian web-based magazines, and they also do activities. And we have an enormous range of South Asian languages in the collection, and of course there are an enormous range of South Asian languages spoken in Birmingham. So Desi Blitz are going to dress up a Punjabi bus as an elephant and take some of these extraordinary holdings to the people, unlike me, who can read them and speak them. And they're going to tour appropriate areas, get people on the bus, talk to them about them, and then they're going to bring them back. And those people are going to install their own South Asian Brummie exhibition at the heart of Centenary Square and in Birmingham Shakespeare Library. We really want to renew Shakespeare by making him more of a vehicle of social justice than he might have been previously in Birmingham. Although, as I've been saying, there's this distinctive heritage in Birmingham where Shakespeare belongs to everybody. It's also the case that, as many of you will know, but perhaps not all of you, that the Birmingham Rep was the first company in the world to perform Shakespeare in modern dress. So Brummie Shakespeare is an underrated commodity, and I was delighted that we were able, on Shakespeare's birthday, to get on the news. So much as I love Stratford, it was us in Sparkhill with the Everything to Everybody project. We also have some heritage ambassadors who are students who are going to work with us, and we have a volunteer programme, and anybody who's interested should please visit our website and contact our programme manager, Nicola Gould, about getting involved. We've been on the front of the Birmingham Post, as you see there, and we're funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The film you saw was part funded by Creative Multilingualism. We're strongly supported by West Midlands History. And that was a little slide about legacy, which if I had more time, I would talk to you about. as you see, the library, and as I said, we're in the top in the golden cap. The library is right next to the rep. So you've got the oldest Shakespeare library in the world. It belongs to all the people of the city, right next to the company, which was the first company in the world to perform Shakespeare in modern dress. And that's an amazing heritage that we really think says something about Birmingham, about its historic commitment to social justice and cultural participation. So I hope that seems resonant with the themes that you've discussed today. I've got an eye on the clock, and I know you've got somebody else to get on with. So I think Peter is going to kindly show a final clip, which is our patron, Adrian Lester, who is himself a well-known Birmingham born and bred Shakespearean, who's going to tell you a little bit about the project. Thank you.
George Dawson's everything to everybody ethos at the Library of Birmingham. I think we'd all agree there's a lot of them and us around at the moment. They came to our school, they did this, we went there, they came and did that, they voted this way. Enough said. But what if there's no them? What if there's just us? The highest artistic forms in this country belong to us. Pick up a book, get involved, walk through the doors, be part of the story. Don't be content to sit back and watch someone tell a story that in some ways can have nothing to do with you. Get involved, get in the door, make that story yours.
Thank you, Ewan.
Thanks, John.
That was, I think everybody will appreciate Ewan really did the service. He put himself out there. He cut a sonnet into a haiku, I think, in that process. Thank you very much for helping us catch up. The first folio will be coming to a lovely cultural location near you. And from what he said, you know, it's not just going to be that they'll come and open the book and you can look at it. There's going to be a whole lot of cultural activity going on around it, opening that book and the collection and the whole Shakespeare story and the George Dawson story to everybody in the communities it's going to. So Ewan, thanks very much. Do look. John. You can see if you Google, I guess, everything to everybody, you'll come to the website and the information. And I know that you and his very small team of helpers at the university and the library will welcome questions and inquiries from people. So are we okay there, Ewan? And we might have to leave it. Did anybody want to ask a question? I just want to know, am I really cutting people off here? Which not in the spirit of this day, but would anybody really, they always say that when they've no time, really like to ask a question? No, we're okay. I do appreciate. Oh yeah, go on then. There's somebody there, so I can't see them. Would you want me to say?
I don't want to ask a question. I just want to say I'm in Shropshire, not in Birmingham, and I don't live in or anything in Birmingham. Yeah. But I love the Shakespeare Library in Birmingham. And also on one of the clips, it did mention the history of Hereford and Shropshire and other areas. And I hope that perhaps you'll be thinking about us and sharing. We don't have any cities in Shropshire.
No.
But you know, we are up for social justice too.
Absolutely, you're very well. You'd be very welcome. Yeah, yeah. I think
that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important. I mean, it is important that it's in Birmingham, not least because people don't, I think, always think of Birmingham as quite the cultural powerhouse that it is. But absolutely, it's about exemplifying a slightly different way of doing establishment culture. And as I say, one that I hope is consonant with social justice and one that's long established. So yes, please do come into town and get involved.
Okay. There's a texting battle going on in the ether between me and other members of the team about what to do and what to cut and what not to do, because we really want to listen to Richard burden in a moment. So, and I can see Richard waiting there. Give us a smile, Richard. I feel I'm going to get shot after this, and that's not again in the spirit of the day. So, Ewan Fernie, thank you very much. Professor Ewan Fernie, Professor of Shakespeare Studies, thank you very much indeed for joining us today and making Shakespeare what it is, not something for the elite, but something for everybody, with all those messages.
Thank you, John.
Most plays are set overseas.
That's true. That's true. None of them are set in Birmingham.
No, unfortunately not, for the collection. All right, okay, great.
Thank
Ewan,
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Back to the family.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Everybody, everybody always waving, thank you. And somebody's clapping, that's great. Thank you very much. Good luck to the project. Do follow it up on the web and talk to you and other people at the library, should you need to. Right, Richard, good evening. We're sorry to delay you. We had, I think you were in for part of it. We had Ali Aarrass, a former prisoner, on earlier, and it was just too moving and too central to what we're about to try and curtail it. Anyway, I don't know the word in French for curtail. Nikki, is Nikki with us? Would you unmute yourself, Nikki? There you are. Hello. Can you turn your sound on? Oh, you're there. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, welcome Richard Burden. Richard, I won't go into this too much because it's been in the bump, but people will know, hopefully, that Richard has been an advocate for the Palestinian cause for donkey's years, I suppose. And not only that, but is he passionate, but he's also expert. And he's visited Palestine and so on. Nikki also is an advocate. Nikki is with the Bourneville Group, where we've last year, but in the middle of COVID, we decided that we'd devote some of our activities to supporting the Palestinian cause. So this is very valuable to us, and I'm sure it is to everybody else, especially since we thought of this session weeks and weeks and weeks ago. And of course, latterly, things have got so much worse. So I'd like to hand over to Nikki and Richard now, who are in conversation about Palestine and Palestinians.
Thanks. So you're going to kick off, Nikki?
Okay. Hello, Richard.
Hi. Good to see you.
Since we last had a talk on Monday this week, things have sadly escalated and a tragedy is unfolding. But I also suppose we should highlight that today is Nakba Day, which means day of catastrophe for the Palestinians. But I want to just come back and ask you why Palestine and what inspired your interest?
Okay, thanks, Nikki, and thanks very much to Amnesty for inviting me along today. It's really good to be here at the Festival of Social Justice. You know, in the light of the horrific events that we've seen over the last week, it almost seems strange to say, well, why be concerned about Palestine? Because, you know, the importance of the issue has been there staring us in our face on the horrors we've seen on our TV screens. But I guess there's something behind that as well, which is all too often we only hear about Palestine and the story of the Palestinians, about the lives they lead, when there is a moment of crisis, when Gaza is being bombed, when Hamas is sending rockets into Israel, or where other appalling things are going on. And that, to me, says something about how I first got involved, because I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s. And at that time, I mean, I like to think of myself as, when I was an early teenager, as fairly well informed as a kid of what was going on in the world. And, you know, I remember the 1967, what was called the Arab-Israeli War. And at the time, the image I had of that was this brave little country called Israel, surrounded by hostile Arab states that were trying to wipe it off the map. That was very much the impression people had in this country and beyond. And it was only a few years later, in the early 70s, when I was a student, actually, and I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement, And I got involved with various people, Peter Hain and others, who at the time were involved in the Young Liberals, who were very active in anti-apartheid and trying to bring about international pressure to create a non-racial South Africa. But they also were quite expert about what was going on in Israel and Palestine, and actually putting the word Palestine into people's vocabulary. And I remember being horrified that actually, despite the fact I knew all about the Arab-Israeli war and what had gone on in 1967, there was this story of an entire people who had been dispossessed as long ago as 1948, who now by that time were either second-class citizens in what became Israel, or were living under occupation in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip, or at that time, others living under occupation in the Sinai Peninsula. And that was quite horrifying for me. And as a result of that, I did try to start speaking out, find out more about it. That led me to make my first visit to the Middle East, actually to Lebanon, in the late 70s when Lebanon was racked by civil war. It was there I visited my first Palestinian refugee camp, was able to speak to Palestinians directly about their story, about their dispossession. And that becomes a life sentence for you, because once you know, once you see for yourself, you can never forget that. And some years later, actually, after I had become a member of parliament, I was able to visit the West Bank and Gaza for the first time in 1993. And there is absolutely no substitute for seeing for yourself what's going on. So that's how I became involved. And, you know, it's the thing that stayed with me. We must not just look at the crises and only take an interest at the time of the crisis. There's a whole story there that has gone on for decades. And unless we address that story, unless we address the underlying injustices, there won't be peace in the area, but also far too many innocent people, both Palestinians and Israelis, will continue to suffer.
I think you're right about the lack of media coverage of the Palestinians and Palestine. And it seems, you know, that it often comes up when violence erupts. And in my view, you know, Hamas at the moment, it always has a touch of violence. But as you say, none of the background information, living under occupation, and Gaza, of course, you know, being more or less like an open prison. So I think we started earlier in the week, didn't we, talking about the threatened evictions in East Jerusalem, which is all part of the important same story. And I understand that Amnesty researchers were on the ground in East Jerusalem and actually documented the disproportionate amount of violence coming from the Israeli troops towards, you know, peaceful protest at the potential evictions, and also, of course, the storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, indeed. The threatened evictions or dispossessions in what's called the Sheikh Jarrah area has captured the headlines recently, and rightly so. But that is the story of quite a small number, actually, of Palestinian families who have lived in that part of East Jerusalem for decades. But actually, they're not the start of the story of dispossessions in East Jerusalem. You know, since 2009, there have been literally, you know, hundreds of structures demolished in East Jerusalem, Palestinian homes and so on. If you look across the West Bank, of which, you know, the occupied territories of which East Jerusalem is a part, you know, there's 7,500 Palestinian homes and other structures have been destroyed by the Israelis just in the last 10 years. 19% of those in East Jerusalem, about 80% of them in what's called Area C of the West Bank. And perhaps we can come on in a little while to talk a little bit about that. But what you were dealing with in East Jerusalem with these families is these were Palestinians who had lived, these families had lived in what became Israel in 1948. they were dispossessed, thrown out of Israel, they became refugees, went to East Jerusalem at that time, which was at the time under Jordanian rule, and under agreement with the United Nations, they were provided with homes to live in East Jerusalem. Now, what is going on now is that there had been in that part of East Jerusalem a Jewish community that had lived for many, many years, well before the state of Israel. And there was a legal action brought to say that Jews, even though they never lived in the houses that these Palestinian families live in, actually were the legal owners of that part of East Jerusalem. And that's what it was about, to actually dispossess the Palestinians. Now, two things I'd say about that. I mean, the first is that it is unlawful because Israel as an occupying power in East Jerusalem, it occupied it in 1967, has got responsibilities under the Geneva Conventions and other laws to the occupied people. And one of those is to respect the rights of the people who live there and actually not to move its own population into the area. So the threatened dispossession of those Palestinian families is contrary to international law. That's generally accepted. But also, you know, that there is an inherent discrimination there because, you know, if one agrees that that Jewish settlers, because of their historical link with the Jewish families who'd lived there before, have got a right to claim those homes in East Jerusalem, why is there not a similar right for Palestinians to claim homes inside what became Israel that they lost in 1948 and subsequently? And there is an inherent discrimination that whilst Israeli law allows Jews to bring those claims, it forbids Palestinians from bringing those claims. So there's an inherent discrimination there. And I think what's brought that case to public attention was not only the enormity of what is threatened to those families, but where it's happening. East Jerusalem, the Sheikh Jarrah area, is literally down the road from the British Consulate General in East Jerusalem and other diplomatic missions. They're literally just down the road. And so under the gaze, literally, of the international community, you will have families threatened with eviction, loss of their homes, loss of their livelihoods, in an effort that is contrary to international law. So there were these protests building up about that, quite rightly. And also those protests went throughout East Jerusalem into the old city. And one of the focal points was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest places in Islam. Now, that has always been an incredibly tense area, and you know it's important for everybody to maintain calm around that area because the Al-Aqsa Mosque is next to or just above the Western Wall, the going back to biblical times, the retaining wall of the Jewish temple there. It's next to the Dome of the Rock, again, very important landmark in East Jerusalem. And there has been, even though it's occupied, a status quo there of international recognition of the rights of all religions to that part of Jerusalem, Islam, Judaism, but also obviously very important to Christianity as well. Now, the response of Israel to what was going on with these protests was, first of all, an acknowledgement and actually doing very little about some really quite nasty demonstrations by right-wing, I have to say, racist settlers calling for the dispossession of Palestinians, but a quite brutal assault on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and worshippers there during Ramadan, and actually probably during one of the most holy days of Ramadan. That brought a flashpoint that meant that the tensions that were going on there just magnified massively. Now, sadly, one of the response to that, there was a great deal of international sympathy and pressure building up in support of the Palestinians. I have to say Hamas's response to that was utterly appalling. to start firing rockets into Israel at a stroke, what they did was divert attention from the absolutely justified protests against what was going on in Sheikh Jarrah and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the genuine popular movement by Palestinians there, to something that became a conflict between Hamas and Israel, and an increasingly bloody conflict as well, of the kind we've seen in the last week. And in a sense, both Hamas and Netanyahu are each other's best recruiting sergeants. Netanyahu a week ago he'd already failed to secure a majority for another term as prime minister, was just about at the point of giving up the ghost of forming a government. This has given him a new lease of life as he poses as the Israeli strongman who then bombs hell out of Gaza. And the kind of things we've seen there are just absolutely outrageous. Now, no doubt I'm talking a lot, no doubt we can talk a bit about Gaza in a while, but already you see well 140, I think the current figure is, people killed there, 37 children in an area which is tiny, absolutely tiny. It's 25 miles long, about the distance between Birmingham and Lichfield, and its width is about the distance between Birmingham and Solihull. Absolutely tiny, with 2 million people crowded within it, with nowhere to go, being struck by the most brutal assaults from artillery and from air attacks and so on. And we saw a new twist to that today with even an attack, an Israeli air attack on the international media building that houses Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. And when you get to the stage of journalists being attacked for describing and bearing witness to what's going on, you're dealing with a very, very serious situation indeed.
Can I also ask you about your views, the fact that the Palestinian elections have been cancelled after no elections being held for 15 years, I believe, and the leadership from Abbas, who seems to be intent on holding on to power, but perhaps, is not a strong voice on behalf of the Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually an international observer at the last round of Palestinian elections. There was a presidential election in 2005 where Mahmoud Abbas was elected president, and a parliamentary election for the Palestine Legislative Council a year later in 2006. Those were the last elections that took place. There is a huge demand amongst ordinary Palestinians for elections to take place. That requires two things to happen. One is for the Palestinian Authority themselves to accept that and to organise those elections. And the second thing it requires is the cooperation of Israel as the occupying power. Now, they did cooperate in a form, not brilliantly, but they did cooperate in a form in 2005 and 2006. And the elections that took place then were regarded and certified as broadly free and fair. The problem this time has been that where voting is allowed to take place. Now, Israel has said that Palestinians can vote in the West Bank, they can vote in Gaza, but they had said they were not going to allow Palestinian, or rather they hadn't said they weren't, they had not agreed to allow voting in East Jerusalem in the way they did in 2006. And in fact, not only had they not agreed to allow Palestinians to vote in East Jerusalem, but they'd also started arresting people for holding election rallies in East Jerusalem in the last 3 to 4 weeks. So now faced with that, the Palestinians said, East Jerusalem is a key part of their country. Without East Jerusalem, there can be no elections. And that's absolutely a fair point. However, there is a great deal of discontent that the response of President Abbas to what was dreadful behavior by Israel in relation to East Jerusalem was just to say, OK, we'll just cancel the elections then, which was not good enough. And there are suspicions that it was internal political reasons for Abbas and his own Fatah faction, put bluntly, thought they may lose, that led him to cancel those elections. That there could have been things that still could have been done. There were issues about how you could do online voting. There was some suggestions that the European Union, who have got, as I say, all their diplomatic missions in East Jerusalem, could start to use those as voting centres. Various ideas like that. Now, I say that doesn't let Israel off the hook, but equally it doesn't let Mahmoud Abbas off the hook as well. And there is a huge demand amongst Palestinians for democratically legitimate leadership. And at the moment, they don't have it. They don't have it with the official Palestinian Authority, and they certainly don't have it with Hamas in Gaza.
Do you have any hope that these elections will take place later this year, or do you feel a sense of despair?
I'm not holding my breath, I have to say. We'll have to see, though, how the current events do pan out. Everybody is rightly saying de-escalate what's going on, stop the bloodshed. That's really, really important. In fact, I rather, wish that the United States would put more pressure on their ally Israel to do that. At the moment, it is actually Israel and the United States that are blocking a UN Security Council resolution to bring about a ceasefire and an end of hostilities. And the words that are coming out of Prime Minister Netanyahu at the moment, it's all the language of vengeance, of saying Hamas will pay a heavy price for what they've done. Now, as I say, Hamas have and are behaving appallingly with their rocket being fired into Israel. Those actions by Hamas are probably criminal under international law, but so too are launching airstrikes on civilian areas, and the international community should be saying very, very clearly, stop. And at the moment, that is not happening. However, if we do get to a stage where those hostilities can be brought to an end, my big fear is that the assumption will be that this can return to normality. Now, normality for Palestinians is the normality of families in Sheikh Jarrah potentially losing their homes, the normality of continued occupation in the West Bank, where Palestinians live under military law next to Israelis who live under civil law, where Palestinians have few rights to water, few rights to build, few rights to have a life in the way we would expect, and no rights to vote for who runs them. I'm not talking about the Palestinian Authority there, because they do live. Ultimately, the Israeli authorities call the shots, literally, in the West Bank, and yet they have no rights to vote for the system under which they live. And in Gaza, they suffer, under quotes normality, to a blockade that has lasted for 15 years now, give or take. Blockade that means that now 56% of the population there live beneath the poverty line. We cannot go back to that kind of normality. There has got to be a reckoning to bring an end to the occupation and to ensure, some fairly fundamental principles. And the most fundamental of all is that Palestinians and Israelis have equal rights to live in security, equal rights to live in peace, and equal rights to self-determination. And until the international community is able to say that has got to be the bottom line, you will have further flare-ups like this, and the tragedy that's lasted for far too long will continue.
What do you, picking up that theme, what do you think of the possibility now of a two-state solution? Or do you think that with the expansion of the illegal Israeli settlements, that it has now gone beyond that point of a Palestinian state?
Well, one of the problems with the call for a two-state solution in diplomatic speak is that it seems to be something that is just trotted out by other governments, as what they say should happen. In other words, if you hear, whether it be Dominic Raab over here, whether it be Joe Biden or whoever, they say we need a solution, therefore we need a two-state solution. That's great. The trouble is that the possibility of a two-state solution is disappearing before our eyes. Some would say it's already disappeared, because what you have is in the West Bank a growth of settlements that actually is physically removing the possibility of a two-state solution, of dividing up Palestinian areas into what kind of resemble Bantustans, with effective control in the West Bank remaining under Israel. Now, that has been Israel's plan for some time, that they've been putting into effect. They've been establishing facts on the ground of conquest by concrete, if you like, that actually fundamentally undermines
I can't hear.
We've lost sound.
Yes. I
For
can't
some reason,
hear.
Richard looks like he's muted.
Ah.
Richard's muted.
Sorry, I accidentally muted then. I don't know how that happened.
Yes, right.
So I don't know what time where I lost you all then, or you lost me.
Yes, you were talking about, the amount of concrete, the creeping annexation, really, of the illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
Yeah, these days there are, about 430,000 Israeli settlers living in settlements in the West Bank that are illegal under international law. There's about 200,000 in East Jerusalem itself. And if you look at the West Bank, 36% of the West Bank, it's divided into 3 areas under the Oslo Accords that were signed in the early 90s. Area A, Area B, and Area C. Now, Area A are the main Palestinian towns, the main population centers, places like Ramallah, places like Bethlehem, places like Nablus. They are the towns. Now, they are formally under Palestinian control. I say formally because, as we've seen this week, if the Israeli army want to go in there to arrest people or do anything they want, they can do that at any time. They haven't ceased to be occupied, but formally they're under Palestinian Authority control. You've then got Area B, which is formally under Palestinian civil control, but Israeli military control. And then you have Area C, which is entirely under Israeli control. That's 36% of the West Bank is Area C. It's in Area C that you see the main settlements being built. And 60% of that 36%, in other words, a huge chunk of what would become under a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, Palestinians are denied either access or ability to do anything there. There are areas designated as state land, which Palestinians cannot occupy or build on, firing zones for Israeli military operations, nature reserves. Sounds great. We would all like to see nature reserves, but the consequence there is to stop Palestinian farmers farming there, stop Palestinians building homes there. Or part of it is what's called the seam zone. This is the zone between the security, well, what some people call the security barrier, others call the wall that Israel built, which is a lot of which is built inside the West Bank, not on the border between the West Bank and Israel. And the bit between the wall and Israel is called the seam zone, where again Palestinians have got very, very few rights. So all of these put together, this matrix of control, is undermining the chances of a two-state solution happening. Now, that said, ultimately the decision of whether or not the two-state solution is to be pursued for a Palestinian state, there's got to be a decision of the Palestinians. It's not for us to make that decision. And I personally think it is important to continue to recognise the sanctity of what's called the Green Line. In other words, the internationally recognised border between Israel and the West Bank, between Israel and the Gaza Strip. Because that is internationally recognised, and it's as a result of that international recognition that Israeli conquest, Israeli settlement building in the West Bank is illegal, because it is not their territory. The danger is if you start saying, well, actually the Green Line doesn't matter anymore. The trouble with that is that can all too easily play into the hands of those that want to obliterate not only the chances of a Palestinian state, but the very principle of Palestinian nationality itself. So it seems to me it is important to defend the Green Line, but the prospect of that becoming what we want to see in terms of a two-state solution, that is disappearing. And if the international community is serious about a two-state solution, it's not enough just to talk about it. It needs to make sure that it happens. And at the moment, it hasn't, and it hasn't ever done that.
I wanted to ask you, Richard, your thoughts on two major reports that have come out this year. The first one from B'Tselem, which of course is the Israeli human rights organization, and the more recent one that comes from Human Rights Watch, both of whom have openly stated that they've called on the Israeli government for committing crimes of apartheid and persecution against the Palestinian people. And I wanted to ask you about your views and this worldwide statement now that they have made.
Yeah, the charge of apartheid is a really, really serious charge. And, you know, there are some, particularly people who are close to the Israeli government, that react very, very harshly against that charge. What I would say is, first of all, this: the crime of apartheid today has a legal interpretation. Clearly, what everybody knows about apartheid is South Africa and the system of institutionalized racial discrimination that ruled South Africa for so many years. That's where the term came from. But under an apartheid convention that was adopted by the international community in the 1970s, and more recently when the International Criminal Court was set up by the Rome Statute in 1998, apartheid has got a legal definition. And that legal definition says that it has got to be an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. That's the legal definition of apartheid. And what B'Tselem, as you say, you know, not a foreign organization, an Israeli human rights organization, and what Human Rights Watch, one of the most respected human rights groups in the world, have said is, if you look at the reality of Israel today, that it meets that definition in different ways. First of all, most obviously in relation to the West Bank, an occupation that's gone on there since 1967, over half a century. Occupations are meant to be temporary. All the indications are that that is seen as permanent by Israel. And that has been the way Israeli government policy has operated throughout. You have a system there where, as say, you've got 430,000 settlers, Israeli citizens with the right to vote for what goes on in the West Bank, the right to vote for the Israeli government. You've also got, you know, over 2 million Palestinians who live there, who have got no right to vote, no civil rights, and whose human rights are regularly and egregiously flouted. So there's an inbuilt discrimination there. On top of that, though, what Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem are saying is it doesn't stop with the occupation. If you look at what happens in Israel itself, the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel, they are second-class citizens, even within Israel. They are citizens, but they do not have the same rights as Jewish citizens of Israel. Planning laws, the ability to build homes, are inherently discrimination in Israel. And that was given an added twist just in the last few years with the passing by the Netanyahu government of what is called the nation state law, which says very specifically that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people and does not, that Palestinians who live there do not come under that category. So if you go back to
Richard,
that legal definition.
Richard,
yeah.
Excuse me. And Nikki, I think we're going to have to sort of, if you could make some concluding remarks, because you know, we are running behind and we've allowed more than the time we envisaged. Tragic story, and we're familiar with some of it, but these insights are really important, and I'm sure we'll want to do more again. But forgive me, we do need to move on. So perhaps some concluding remarks from both of you, to you know, where is this going now? What are the critical next steps for us to be attentive to, and then in Bourneville we'll give it our support.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely fair point, John. And when Nikki and I were talking about this earlier in the week, we thought 20 minutes will be a long time to fill in, and then we rapidly came to the conclusion that we were going to run out of time, and that's precisely what's happened. Well, what needs to happen, what going forward? First of all, the first priority has got to be to bring an end to the bloodshed that's taking place at the moment. That means both ending the rocket fire into Israel, but also the Israeli strikes against Gaza. The second thing is there has to be accountability. You know, for too long, you know, there have been war crimes committed in that part of the world. Nobody's held accountable. The International Criminal Court are now investigating the possible commission of war crimes there since 2014. That investigation has got to go ahead. Britain should be supporting it, not as we've got with the current government, which is attempting to undermine that investigation. The third thing is that we've got to bring an end to the root causes of what we've seen happening over the last week. That means ending the occupation and establishing a principle of equality between Palestinians and Israelis. Now, my preferred solution to that, and the international community's preferred solution, is a two-state solution. But whether it be a two-state solution or some other formulation, the principle has got to be equal rights for both. You know, the Palestinians have got no more rights to peace and security than Israel because they're Palestinians, and Israelis have got no more rights to peace and security than Palestinians should have because they're Israelis. So that's future. The last thing I would say is this. Please do raise your voice about this. International pressure is important. It's important to let the Palestinians and those brave human rights defenders inside Israel know that they're not alone. And when you're able to do that, if you're, you know, so expressions of solidarity are important. Support for charities like Medical Aid for Palestinians, who do an absolutely fantastic work in bringing much needed medical supplies to Palestine. If you can donate to that, that's great. And the last thing I would say is this: when we can do things like this again, go there, see for yourself, because, you know, there's only so much I can talk about, anybody can talk about. It's only when you go there, meet Palestinians and Israelis for yourself, see the situation on the ground for yourself, that can you really grasp what's going on there and the importance of this, not just to the peoples involved, but globally as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you know, the Bourneville group, Nikki, and indeed Pat Robinson, who was translating for Ali, are leading on this for us. And we may turn to you for advice and steer about those kind of actions that we can take locally, and maybe other groups will join as well, because there are several groups represented in the audience tonight from different parts of the Midlands. So thank you both very much for investing so much time, not just tonight, but I know you've met online or whatever, to prepare for this evening. I had no such thoughts. I thought it was going to be a huge subject, but thanks, you've covered it so well. So thanks.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you so much. Okay.